Okay, it's 3 o'clock and we're going to continue with the budget hearings, and next up is emergency management. So, Aaron?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Aaron Mangan, Shawnee County Emergency Management. Here to give you a kind of a quick overview of the department, kind of some of our operations, how we're doing things, not just throughout last year, but also kind of in today's world. And then I'll talk about our budget request for 2021. I also have the Deputy Director, Scott Garcia, here, who's also our Finance Section Chief. So we'll kind of move right into it. We kind of talk about overall mission, and this has not changed in several years, with the exception of one word that will come into the another slide here that'll be coming up. Our mission is to provide a 24-hour operation to reduce the loss of life and property and to protect the environment. The highest priority is to protect Shawnee County residents from all hazards by providing and coordinating resources, expertise, leadership, and advocacy through a comprehensive risk-based emergency preparedness program of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. Now, that extra word that was added, the Department of Homeland Security added it approximately about 4 years ago, is the word protection. Basically, the protection side was to cover the anti-terrorism and the protection of the homeland. However, that also covers cybersecurity issues, resource issues that we might be shorting, hazardous materials issues, and then, of course, weapons of mass destruction, whether that be some type of a bio-terrorist agent or whether it be a large-scale explosive or other items that may be used. So we use all of those different fields of preparedness and response in order to prepare not just the first responders and the emergency responders, but the general public as well. So our vision throughout this whole process, and we've done this year after year, is we add to the whole community concept. This is not just what we usually talk about, the first responders being emergency management, police, fire, and EMS. This is everybody out there. It's the non-governmental agencies, the private organizations, individual family, in order to come together and really strive to maintain that resilient community so we can bounce back when something bad happens or we have a large-scale incident or disaster, just like we're going through right now. How are we going to bounce back from this? So it's our continuous professional effort through mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and protection will create a standard that allows us to increase the consciousness of our residents to create better situational awareness, making sure that people can see everything about what's going on, or the whole picture, if you will, and not just focus on one single thing at hand. And that can sometimes be a huge obstacle in our way. In previous years, we haven't been able to this year yet, but we've been requested to teach a ton of situational awareness courses to really get people to open their eyes and look around them and see what's going on. What are we missing? And our efforts will increase self-responsibility, overall community awareness, preparedness, and resiliency, which limits dependency on governmental resources. We train people on a constant basis. We haven't been able to do a lot of really hands-on training, but we have used the state of the events in the nation today to also train them for future events that may occur, not knowing when this will end. And we use a host of resources, whether that be physical items or whether that be other responders and subject matter expertise in order to make those things happen. So that's where it comes into our unity of effort. Once again, it's not just your emergency management department out here doing stuff, trying to protect the community. We bring in as many people as we possibly can. We have elements of the community that we will talk to and discuss things and give presentations and trainings to. We try to include those people in our exercises so they understand this is what police are going to do and what fire is going to do, what EMS is going to do, what the private organizations may be doing in order to help them. We also bring in, when we talk about private organizations or non-governmental entities, we work a lot with the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, harvesters. We work with the local emergency planning committee. We're the coordinating agency and department for the LEPC, and we bring in all the large manufacturers, Goodyear, Mars. We're now bringing on the City of Topeka Utilities Department, specifically the water department, because of their vulnerabilities and some of their problems, and of course their planning that they could potentially look at or encounter when it comes down to supplying basic necessities to the City of Topeka and Shawnee County. It also comes back to, we bring in Capital City Oil and some of the other things that we consider critical infrastructure. We pay very close attention to critical infrastructure, and we constantly work with them to help them respond to things better when things do happen, and of course be able to supply the not just the responders and agencies, but also the citizens when something bad were to happen. But we collect, analyze, and distribute information from various sources of all levels, and that's not just on a city or county level either. We work with the state quite closely, with the Kansas Department of Emergency Management, and we also work with federal agencies such as the Department of Homeland Security, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, FBI, KBI, and a host of other resources where we gain information, and we can drill that down and analyze that information. We work to keep elected and appointed county leadership in place on the most efficient track to ensure continuity of government for the residents of Topeka and Shawnee County in the event of a disaster. We're constantly looking at continuity of operations plans. We've gone through a lot of those here in the last few months as people are working from home and then turning around and returning back to work, and how can we make that place a safe workplace for them to return to, especially with reopening county government, the courthouse, and other specific county and city departments. So all of this falls into our overall goal when we really look at how things happen and how we're working with other people. Our overall goal is to keep the processes that have a direct impact to life safety and public safety operating, and strengthen our whole community by mitigating threats, lowering risks, and protecting the people and property of Shawnee County government and all of its residents. We develop strategies with life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation as the basis for all objectives, regardless of whatever it is. Whether that be an EF5 tornado that comes through, flooding, some type of a terrorist attack, whether it be COVID-19 that we're dealing with. We look at those three basic strategies to deal with these types of problems and situations. That also falls back into the basic NIMS, or National Incident Management System, which the county adopted in 2005 as to kind of how we operate when it comes to resiliency in the community, and that is a basic tenet of the Incident Command System, which we fall under and work with on a daily basis. That also goes back to the support of our THIRA, or our Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment, that we develop, and we review that once a year. We look at everything that could potentially affect Shawnee County, and not just Shawnee County specific, but in the surrounding area that could potentially come into Shawnee County. And then we work with all of our different response agencies and those private organizations to figure out what the risk to Shawnee County is, how large of a threat it is, how long it may persist within the community, and how long is it going to take to recover from this, and what type of an impact could it have. And that ranks those different items as to what we really focus on and to what we need to work on most of the time. So when we come to the overall budget request, there are a few things that we've kind of switched up this year. We have had an increase from last year and years past. When we look at the MSA 1 increases, which is basically salaries and wages, one of our strategic things is, yes, it covers the standard yearly increases. However, the planning section, that position is funded by a grant that comes from the state, or that is administered by the state, that comes from FEMA. With that grant, we usually don't get the application until late August, early September, and that's being lucky usually, is when we get that application for the grant money, and that is for that current year. And then it very well could be very mid or late October, even possibly early November, before we get an answer as to whether we've been awarded that grant. So the individual that may be serving as the planning section chief, it very well could be late November, early December before we determine if we're going to have grant money to pay them for the year that they've already have worked in emergency management. That grant, we've looked at other ways of how to deal with it. However, it is specific for a support of the planning spot in emergency management. It does allow for some equipment purchases. However, it's extremely limited, and it is at the blessing of the state if we were to put in for some type of a resource as to whether they would approve that or not. So that's basically where that largest increase is. In MSA 2, which is basically a lot of the things that we pay for on a recurring basis every year, such as our Virtual Emergency Operations Center, the Adobe platform that we pay for, the licenses, a lot of our KEMA memberships, our KCEMs, the Walker Stream Gauge that we come up on a yearly basis and request permission There are several things that basically that stay the same. That also covers our training budget, and we have increased our training budget a little bit in order to hopefully send some more people to training that could potentially cost some money. And then, of course, under Section 3, that has not increased very much at all. A lot of that is our vehicle maintenance that we're requesting, standard maintenance. One of the largest increases on that one that we've asked for is it's come time to replace the tires on a lot of our resources. That would include the comfort trailer, one of our utility trailers, and 3 of our vehicles. The large prime mover that we have, we don't believe it's ready for tires yet, but it very well could be in the next couple of years. So right now, that's our largest increase is vehicle maintenance and some other supplies for the EOC itself. I stand for any questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Betty.
I'm just trying to figure this out, that grant that we're using for these, some of the salaries.
Yes.
That's about 90-some thousand a year. So are you just not going to request that at all?
We will request it right now, depending on how things, how long this is going to go on. One, it kind of secures the position of that person that is in the planner spot. And right now, we are a full person short in the emergency management department. We don't have a full-time planner, so we've been spreading it out among the rest of the staff. And in the future, we want to be able to ensure that if we have a planner on, not only can we continue to have that person on staff as a planner in case they don't award us that grant, with as much money as being spent this year, not just by the state, but by the federal government as well, it's kind of a bad feeling if they decide next year not to award those grants strictly because of the amount of money that's been spent so far.
Well, I guess my thought is, though, I mean, what, are you going to use that money for something else, or what are we going to use it for? I don't want us to just not apply for $90-some thousand.
Right, we would hire an intermittent position, or a part-time position, if you will, to come in and fill the planner's position, and that could eventually also move into the training and exercise portion when the state opens that possibility back up for us to start doing that. And we can also make the exception when they are brought on that it is grant-based and they're not guaranteed a full-time position by the end of the year.
But that's not going to take up $90-some thousand.
It shouldn't. But we do use that for intermittent positions as well as needed, and we're using some of that grant money right now for 2 intermittent positions that we brought on due to current situations.
So, Betty, I mean, I guess my question is, are you asking that the emergency management should go ahead and apply for that grant regardless, and then being able to allocate those monies towards that position that's not filled, or?
I'm just, well, here's my concern. In the past, and I understand, a lot of times it was clear down to year end before we found out if we were going to get that grant or not.
Right.
But at least it was going towards those salaries when we got it.
Right.
If we don't use it towards those salaries, and it's very specific, as you said, exactly what you can use it for, then we're not going to be able to have enough expenses to receive the whole $90-some thousand. And then the general fund has picked that up. I think I would almost rather stay with the procedure we had before, and then if for some reason we don't get that grant in that year, then we come to the commission and say, we planned on this and we were denied this money, and look at contingency or something else. I'm just concerned that in the whole scheme of things, we're gonna miss out on money.
Along that same line, my question is, I mean, with the COVID Sparks money that has come in, I mean, that's kind of changed how we do a lot of things in the county, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
And I know that we can't use the Spark money for salaries, but is there a way that we can use some of the Spark money for the operations of emergency management, shifting that money that would have been spent on operations into salary?
Well, for 2020, you can spend Sparks money on salaries. It's just-
Overtime, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
I thought it was just overtime.
No, if they are devoted more than half to COVID, you can turn in 100% of theirs. So there are things, but that's 2020. We're looking at 2021 here. So And it may, who knows what they will, I know there's something now looking at additional funding for for COVID related. I don't know what the federal government will do on that. I guess my concern is just that we would leave money on the table.
So
that we would have.
it would be your ask for the emergency management to consider to continue to do the way the things they have been doing, knowing that if they do get denied, we would go to contingency if it got denied.
I mean, we've talked about that in prior years, because like I say, sometimes we don't know until it's just about the end of the year. If I remember right, there's been some years it was down to the wire, down to the end of the year. Anyway, that's my concern.
Scott Garcia, Shawnee County Emergency Management. That was one of our biggest worries, is the fact that since I've done this, we've always had MPG money, but like you guys mentioned, it keeps getting pushed back further and further into the year, and that's what is it? It's July 23rd now, and we haven't even got the application yet. And so that was one of our biggest worries, was that here we are spending the money for this planner, and then come December, we find out we don't get it, and we're gonna be like, okay, Mahan, we need $70,000 back from you. And that was one of our biggest worries, is that, and that's, I'm saying that, but it's not guaranteed. And as with COVID happening and stuff like that, you would think that they wouldn't cut areas like this, but you never know. And with it getting pushed back further and further and it not being guaranteed, that's one of our biggest worries. Because that's a lot of money that we do get. And if this was to happen, we would still apply for the 93 grand. And if we got it, there are other ways to spend that money, and we would work with audit finance to make sure that we fall in within those guidelines and we do get those funds spent so that we don't have to send them back.
Well, and see, and my concern is, this is $74,000, they want to increase their budget, and we all know how tight the budget is going to be this year. So that's my concern, that,
The increase in the salary is to have the additional individual, adding the planning position, or, because their planner is not filled right now.
Correct. It's being shared between all three full-time staff members.
in the past, or normally,
And we do,
several years in the past.
Correct.
We've had one position that was paid 100% from this grant money, and then some other things too.
right, there have been a few extras that have been on with the grant money, but it has supported the full-time planner spot. And the planner and the training and exercise coordinator was rolled into one role, as we consider the training side of it and exercising it, making sure that those plans work, is a huge part of that position. And planning, even though we all talk about the plans the first thing to go out the window, the planning process is priceless, and we continually work on plans regardless of who it is. We have all kinds of different companies and individuals, schools, businesses calling us, along with Shawnee County government, asking for assistance with their plans and ideas on how to put those together.
So if we would make this change and put this into the general fund, the planner into the general fund, then you would be using it for other things, and so you'd really just be increasing your department by a person.
Correct.
Do you intend that, obviously, right now, things are pretty hopping with everything going on with COVID. A lot of Dusty's responsibilities, he's been handling that as a recovery team. But September of 2021, they come up with a vaccine, COVID's no more. What would impact would that then have on emergency management? Do we go back down to the way we were, or do we continue where we're at? Does COVID even play into that?
COVID does play into it, and that's one of our main concerns, like I said, with the amount of money that the federal and the state governments are paying out for, the stimulus packages, everything they're having to do, and what's their recovery plan going to be, which of course we have no idea. Come September of 2021, they may say, we're still trying to recover from this, we don't have the money for grants this year. It could very well be 3 to 4 years down the road. Now, when the time comes when they say we're offering the grant, or yes, we're offering the grant, it will be the same amount as it was in years past. We can always consider moving that position back into the grant, when we know that the grant money may be secure, which would then, of course, would lower the budget.
Well, and I guess I have to put a caveat on this, because I'm talking about as if 2021 is going to be a normal year. Wouldn't that be nice? And we all know that may not happen at all, but that's the way I'm looking at it at this point in time, but
Sure.
that may not be the case.
Sure. And we understand, I mean, even right now, it's day by day, so there's not even any way we can guess what next year is going to be like. But
There isn't.
I see funding being a struggle for several years now.
Do we know what some of our local counterparts are looking at as far as their budget, given that, I mean, we're the largest, in northeast Kansas, we're one of the largest players in emergency management. But what's like Potawatomi and Wabunsee and Jefferson, Jackson, Osage, our smaller counterparts, what are they looking at right now?
Most of them do have one full-time position with maybe a part-time assistant or coordinator to help them out. I haven't talked to them about their budgets or if they're increasing or if they're decreasing or what it is they're doing.
I mean, I didn't know if this is, I mean, and then same with the discussion on the grants, are we hearing things, you know, across our listservs about what the state might be doing? Is, you know, the same concern across, I meing, with Douglas County and Wyandotte and
We haven't really heard a lot about grant money recently. Most of grant discussions have been for acquisition of different resources and what can we buy, but not necessarily for funded positions, staff or personnel. But I can say that not every county in the state applies for that EMPG money or the grant money. It's usually just the larger communities that do apply for it that can support a full-time planner.
okay.
Any other questions?
With the elimination of the city's emergency management office of what it was, do we, I mean, I know that there were some materials that we received from them. I don't know, is there anything additional job-wise that we need to do, or has that impacted your budget at all?
It hasn't impacted our budget. It hasn't really moved us out of any of our normal operations that we've done in the past. It just changes our paths of communication. I have met with City Manager Trout, and 4 of his department heads, myself and Scott Garcia, went and talked to them a little bit, kind of about what our mission and goals were and kind of what they might need from us in the event of a disaster incident. I was told that they do have people within some of those departments that do a lot of emergency planning, however, not quite to the level that we do. And they said, you know, can we reach out, ask questions every now and then, or maybe for some guidance or advice? And we told them absolutely. However, most of our response is going to be in case of a large-scale hazmat incident at one of their facilities, but I would probably hazard a guess that 90% of it's going to be severe weather and flooding. And a lot of those contacts are already in our email lists, and they get the information that we push out, and if we hear or see something in the city, I would just go direct with that department head instead of going through their former emergency management coordinator.
Right. I mean, we don't have a lot of parades or large gatherings downtown that we're dealing with right now.
Correct. And most of those, over the last couple of 3 years, have been moved over to planning by specific departments and not necessarily their emergency management coordinator. He did have somewhat of a hand in it. There was some discussion towards the latter part of last year about bringing us back into the planning aspect for development of an event action plan and maybe some rapid tagging using our CERT members. And they're all pretty much volunteers.
So I guess a big piece is going to be the application of that grant and applying for that grant, whether we apply for it or not, and if we apply for it, knowing full well that it may disappear, and then planning for that.
Sure. And it's not that we're not going to apply for it. When the application comes in, we will apply for it. And we can always use intermittent employee for some of the other things that we need done, depending on what some of our duties may do. As the world does return to quote-unquote normal, a lot of our volunteers may be returning to the workplace, so we will need to be replacing a lot of people, and we may not be able to find volunteers, so we very well may have to look at intermittent employees, and they can be paid out of that grant funding.
Are there volunteers that you think would be good candidates for intermittent employees or would possibly be interested?
There might be a few that we're looking at. I know that most of them are being hired as intermittents right now. The volunteer coordinator that we took on in emergency management, along with one information specialist, and then an information specialist that the health department brought on, along with the hotline branch director. A lot of those people are slowly picking it up. And I do have some other people that have volunteered. One of our resource unit leaders is extremely involved and interested in emergency management, currently working on their Kansas Certified Emergency Management.
What do most of your intermittents do? What do they do?
It's basically those positions I named. When we first brought it on, we realized we were going to need a large number of volunteers. So we brought on a volunteer coordinator who was volunteering their time while they were laid off from their job. But after discovering the amount of work they were putting in and just how well they were doing their job, we hired them as an intermittent because we knew that they would be off work for an extended amount of time. There was also one of the information specialists that acts as our scribe at every single meeting and gathering that we have and takes a ton of information down for documentation. And then the health department brought on, who was a volunteer, is now an intermittent employee, and they supervise both of the hotlines that are housed down at the EOC, the rumor control hotline, and then the testing and appointment hotline for the drive-through testing sites. Who else did we bring on? Who? Oh, yeah, we do have Scott Steele. Sorry, I forgot him. He's our resources unit leader. He deals with all of our heavy equipment, moving things around, all of our badging systems, computer systems when it comes to the incident management teams. Scott Steele's, he's a part-time, but he is intermittent, but he's available when we do need him. And he is a certified emergency manager for the state of Kansas.
Speaking of badging, I know that was a primary function of the city of Topeka's emergency management was doing the badges. Did they contract that with us, or are they doing it through the PD? Or?
They do have one of their police department. I don't want to know if he's a full-time person or not. He's not a sworn officer, but he does employed by the police department. He is taking over their badging, and I have had him and Scott Steele get together and talk about kind of what the process is for how things work with the city as opposed to the county, and then how those duties may cross at times.
Okay.
I noticed here we have a contract with USGA, or USGS. Is that for some kind of mapping, or what?
That's the stream gauge at the Wakarusa River that we have to pay fees on every year.
And that's separate from the gauge that the Conservation District has, which is also separate from the gauge that, who else came in here?
Extension?
Yes, Extension. Or, is it Extension or solid, not solid? There's 3 different gauges.
Yeah, the one over the Wakarusa River is the only one that we're responsible for every year.
Floods every year. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Commissioners.